Okay, hi everyone. Today I'm going to go through and show you how to configure and set up your own NAS using this software NAS4FREE. And then a little bit down the track, we'll go and install our own cloud service on this NAS4FREE box as well. So let's get started. What we've got is obviously this is the logon screen, so after you've installed NAS4FREE, it's actually quite straightforward. The default username and password is admin, and the default password is NAS4FREE with the number 4, just like that. So what you get is, once we log in, this is what you'll see. So straight up it says no DNS settings found, so that's fine. I'll go through this across the top here. So the first one we'll go through is look under general. So obviously here we can change the username. We can change it to HTTPS if we want. I'm just going to leave everything default for the purposes of this. You can go through and play around with it yourself. Obviously host name, your domain if you have one. I'm going to leave all that default for this. A couple of things I'm going to add to it is the DNS server, so I'm going to add my router. The other thing I want to add is my location so that it picks up the time zone. So I'm from here. I'm not going to put the NTP server just for now, because we still have to put in a gateway. So once you've done that, click save. So that's good. Changes have been applied successfully. If you want to change your password, obviously go in here and change it. Again, obviously it's all recommended, but I'm not going to bother for this, the purposes of this. Go back to general. One other thing before we do is go into network, then we're going to LAN management. So in here, the default IP address is that 192.168.1.250, and I'm going to put in my gateway, which is my router. IP6 I don't use. The MTU I'm just going to leave default, and media is default. I'll click save. So once you've added the gateway, it says you must reboot for the system to take changes. So before I do, I'm going to go back into general. Now, if I select the NTP server, it'll save, because if you don't put in the this gateway, it can't connect to the internet and it'll give you an error. So, okay, so what we'll do is we'll just go and reboot and be right back. Okay, so it's rebooted and I've logged back in. So as you can see, this is just an old box that I had. I'm using as a test system. So I'm actually using the embedded x86. So it's an old P43 gig 32-bit processor. Obviously motherboard, all that kind of stuff. Down here you can see CPU usage at the moment. It's doing nothing. I've got 2 gigs of RAM in it. It's used 500 megs or so for the embedded install. So we've got no disks configured, no UPS, nothing else, very basic. I think there was one other thing, is if you have a newer type of pro computer, if you tick the power daemon, and you get a choice of it'll fluctuate, the processor depending on how much usage you have, so it can actually save you some power. So I'm going to put minimum. Although this is an old processor, it doesn't work. Because if I go back to system, nothing's changed here. If you have a processor that actually supports it properly, you'll see the frequency in here, what frequency it's running at. Anyway, so the next thing we'll do is we'll move right along to disks. So if we click on the disks, we got to go to management. So in here you can see there's nothing. First thing we need to do is go import. So do you really want to import the existing config? Maybe I've written. Okay. What you'll see here now is I've got 3 80 gig Seagate hard drives, and that's my 500 meg OS boot drive. So if your disks are new, in the file system here, it'll either say unrecognized or something else other than that. These I've gone and formatted to the ZFS type, which I'll go through shortly. But you know, if file system comes with unknown, that's fine, because we have to go and format anyway. The other, while we're here, other thing to do is go to Smart. I'll go and I just put mine on standby, but if you read there, it explains everything. You can also go and set other things you want, set email tests and scheduled self-tests. So I'm just going to leave all that for now. Just activate the Smart. I don't use this, so I'm just going to leave it. Okay, so first thing we need to do is we need to go to disks. We've imported them. Now we want to go format. So in here you should see, I've got the 3 disks there. So when you select one, you can actually, if you want just to do a RAID 5 or a RAID 1 or RAID 0, whatever, you can actually just go software RAID. Alright, and then click format. So do you want to format? Yes. And then you'll see down here it's deleted and it's done. And then you do that for each one. Format. Done. But in this case, I'm actually going to use the ZFS storage pool device, so I'll go back and format it to that. If you want to go online and have a bit of a read about the ZFS storage, it's a bit more excuse me, it's a bit more sophisticated than RAID. RAID's still useful, but the whole point of this is to use ZFS, as in it's got a lot more security features built into it. So as you can see, I've formatted, well, I'm just going to format all 3. So we're done. So once we've formatted, next step is to we're going to go into this ZFS option. So in here we've got nothing. So with ZFS, the first thing we have to do is we actually have to create a virtual device under pools. It's a little bit confusing because it's all kind of new. I'm only just barely getting my head around it, but I've gotten it to work, so that's all that matters, I think. So what we're going to do is we're going to have to add a new virtual device. So you can see it gives us an option of all of our devices. So we have an option of straight stripe, mirror, single parity, double parity, triple parity. So single parity Z, RAID Z is kind of like RAID 5, where there's 1 disk for parity. Double parity is 2 disks for parity, and triple is obviously 3. So the more hard drives you have, you choose more parity. So double parity is probably a little bit like a RAID 6, where there's 2, you lose 2 drives to parity. Obviously there's a hot spare, log, mirror, so there's a whole bunch of options there, and this is particularly for the ZFS file system. So for this basic shoot, I'm just going to leave it on stripe, so there's no parities whatsoever. If you're using, if you're building this to use a system, I would not recommend using stripe because there's no redundancy. But for this scenario, I'm just going to use stripe. Obviously, we give it a name. I'm going to call it vStripe. So, because it's a virtual device, vStripe. You can give it a description. For bigger hard drives, you may be able to use this, but mine are old and small, so I'm not going to use that. There we go, add. And one thing you'll notice with this NAS4FREE is everything has to be done twice, just in case. So even though clicked add, I still have to click apply changes. Okay, so now it's actually in there. So that's step one. Now the second step we have to do is we have to go to management and actually we create a pool. So we go add. So that's the virtual device we've just created. So that virtual device is kind of like the hard drive, if you kind of think of it that way. So in here we have to give this pool a name. So just for this sake, I'm going to call it pool 1 because you can have multiple pools. So in this scenario, I'll call it pool 1 just for simplicity's sake. Again, you can change all that, put a description if you want. I'm leaving everything as default, and then we go add. So it's everything, it's initializing, and if I go apply changes, you can see excuse me, 380s 380 gig hard drives comes to a total of 224 because there's no stripe. Sorry, it's stripe and there's no parity at all, so we're using all 3 disks. So I've got 220 gigs free, and it's online. So okay, so that's kind of like the hard drive are ready to go. So at this point in time, if we wanted to just use that full hard drive, it's ready to go. But what I'm going to do in here is that because I want to install ownCloud, I'm going to go and create kind of like a petition for it. It's not entirely accurate, but works in a similar way. And in here, it's called a dataset. So it's a little bit confusing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create 2 datasets, one for media files to share as a NAS, and the other one for the ownCloud installation. So we kind of keep it separate. So the first one I'm going to call it www for the ownCloud installation. Obviously there's a warning. I found if we leave everything default, it works well. Don't worry about all that kind of stuff. Leave everything as default and it should be good. So we go add. Again, apply changes. So you can see the pool, which is kind of like the full drive, and then we kind of create little petitions if you kind of think of it that way. And then the other one, I'm going to call it media. So go add, apply. Okay, so now we've actually got 2 folders, kind of like 2 petitions in there. One where we'll share all our media on our local network, and the other one can be used for our ownCloud installation. You can go through, I'm not going to go through these in this video, but if you're inclined, go through and read more about those. So in terms of setting up the disks and the petitions, we're ready to go. Okay, so I'll go over here. So these are the services that are available on NAS4FREE. So the 3 that I use, obviously CIFS or Samba, we'll use SSH, and we'll use the web server for ownCloud. Later on, we'll go through some rsync and maybe FTP, and the other one I use is dynamic DNS. So very, very useful, and it's all built in. So the first thing we're going to do is go into the Samba settings. So here is where we create the share to share on our local network. So over here, click enable. For this purposes, I'm just going to go anonymous because it's just easier. I want everybody to be able to access it. It's kind of been realized that if you choose NT1, you get better, even though it says here for legacy OS like XP, a lot of people have been saying that they get better transfer speeds with NT1, no matter what OS you're using, 7 or Vista. You can change, obviously, NetBIOS name, leave it. You can change a work group. I'm just going to change that to one I use at home. For all interfaces, obviously it goes through. The only other ones I would change are these to no. because they've been they kind of affect the speed of data transfers. Everything else is okay to leave as default. The advanced settings, for now, I'm just going to leave everything as default. The only thing I would tick is this one. Leave them as default, because you can see down here, to increase the performance, try the asynchronous IO switch, which is that one. Enable large read write, which is up here, which is already ticked by default, and enable tuning, that's ticked by default as well. So on this page, just that one. Click save and restart. Okay, now it says the changes have been applied successfully. That means the Samba service is up and running, so we're ready to share. So once that's done, we go over to the shares. So in here, we click add. So the first one I want to do is the media one. So I'm just going to call it, the name to share is media. Simple as that. Comment media files to share. Whoops. Okay, now this is important, this bit. So if we click over here, you can see that we have the pool one, which is like the drive, the one big drive, and then the two partitions or folders. So in this particular case, this is media. If we click OK, I've been having some issues for some reason, but usually when you click OK, it automatically adds the path, but in this case it hasn't. So I'm going to go copy, paste. So if you copy and paste, you can't get it wrong. Obviously, if you want read-only, I'm just going to leave all this as default. You can actually enable recycle bin. Again, I'm leaving everything as default for now, so we go add. Again, we have to apply. And so now, if we open up Internet, our Explorer, and I'll go to 1.250, which is the default IP for NAS4FREE, you can see we've created a media share. Straight in it, folder's empty, obviously, because there's nothing in it. So even though it's called media, I'm copying just a file. I'm on wireless at the moment, so it's a bit slow. So you can see I can read and write straight to it straight away. So that's quite simple, quite straightforward, and that's a local Samba share. Okay, so while we're here, we can add another one. If you're not very comfortable with Linux, what we can do is we can go and add the www one. Okay, if it doesn't add it, I'll just go copy it, paste, and I'll explain this in a second. So I'm just going to call this www, and the description is ownCloud files, so that you can actually extract ownCloud into that directory from Windows, and then we'll go back later and we'll probably remove it, because once ownCloud's up and running, you probably don't want anybody on the local network to be browsing to it, and even though they probably won't be able to do anything to it, it's just probably not necessary. So if I go back to my shares, now you see www share. So one advantage is of creating that share, and the reason for it is that when you go and download, once you have your ownCloud tar file, which I've already downloaded from Windows, you can actually just copy it straight across. So the tar file, I found it a lot easier and a lot quicker to actually extract that file in Linux quicker, and we'll go through those steps very shortly. So now that our shares have been set up, well, two other things we need to do: go to SSH and enable it. And just for this purpose, tick this box, and that allows you to SSH straight in as a root user, which can be dangerous. So we'll do it. There's just a couple of things that I want to do manually, so we'll do that for now. We can just turn it off later. The other thing we want to do is the web server for ownCloud. So obviously protocol, go over here and enable. So again, you can enable HTTP or HTTPS. Because we're running ownCloud under the NAS4FREE, the NAS4FREE is currently using the port 80. So what we do here is we have to add another port. So I'm just going to go 8080 to use for the ownCloud. In here, it's going to ask you for document root. So click the pool. So www, that's why we want to call that the document root. Again, just copy and paste if it doesn't insert it. Over here, this upload directory, I'd recommend changing it purely because, especially if you've got an embedded install like I have, it will fill up your drive very quickly. So what I usually do is I make it the same and then create a temp folder. Right, and we'll go and we'll manually create that temp folder for the upload directories to store its temp folders in there. I leave everything else as default. Save and restart. Awesome. So now we've actually got the web server up and running as well as a service. Now over here, access users and groups. So we're using the default admin user group. You can actually see in here the groups. So there's admin groups, different types of groups, and importantly, there's a www group. So we need to make some changes for www. With ownCloud, if we use a Linux distribution like Ubuntu, whatever, the user for ownCloud is www.data, but in ownCloud, it's just www. So if we want to go in here, create as many users as you need that you want to have access NAS4FREE. I'm just going to skip this for these purposes right now. It's pretty self-explanatory. I don't have Active Directory or anything here, or LDAP, so I don't use any of that. We'll go over to status. If you click on status, obviously it just takes you to this initial page. So we're using a little bit more memory. It tells you we've got one pool there. We're using 0%, or we've used 13.6 megs, which is basically that ownCloud tar file. You can go through here. It's pretty good to check the status. Got temperature, hard drive temperature is a bit warm at the moment. So okay, so in terms of setting up your NAS4FREE, you have your own NAS with your ZFS storage pool shared on your local network. That's pretty much it in terms of the NAS4FREE. So what we're going to do now is that what we're going to do now is go back and install and configure the ownCloud running under NAS4FREE. It's actually pretty straightforward. Okay, be right back.